Dr. Elena Vasquez stared at the floating holographic display in her laboratory on Kepler Station, her dark eyes reflecting the swirling patterns of quantum equations that had consumed her life for the past 3 years. The numbers dancing before her represented humanity's most ambitious project yet, a faster-than-light drive that could revolutionize space travel and place humans among the stars as equals to the advanced alien civilizations that had dismissed them as primitive newcomers. The station hummed with quiet efficiency around her, its white corridors and sterile laboratories a testament to human engineering prowess. Outside the reinforced windows, the gas giant Kepler 442b swirled in mesmerizing patterns of blue and gold, its storms larger than entire planets. This remote location had been chosen specifically for its isolation, far from populated systems, where accidents could prove catastrophic. "Elena, you need to see this," called Marcus Webb from across the lab, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and concern. The young engineer had been her closest collaborator on the project, his practical mind perfectly complementing her theoretical brilliance. His sandy hair was disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit that emerged whenever he encountered something that challenged his understanding of physics. She moved to his workstation, where multiple screens displayed cascading data, streams from their latest test. The prototype FTL drive sat in the center of the laboratory, a sleek cylinder barely larger than a person, its surface covered in exotic materials that seemed to bend light around them. The device hummed with barely contained energy, its quantum processors calculating dimensional fold equations at speeds that would have been impossible just decades earlier. "The dimensional resonance readings are off the charts," Marcus said, pointing to a graph that showed energy spikes far beyond their theoretical maximums. "When we activated the prototype 30 minutes ago, it didn't just bend space-time like we expected. It did something else entirely." Elena leaned closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. The readings showed that their device had created what appeared to be a perfect tear in the fabric of reality itself, a wound in space-time that allowed instantaneous travel across vast distances without the gradual acceleration that traditional FTL drives required. The implications were staggering. "This is impossible," she whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple improvement in propulsion technology. The energy requirements alone should have destroyed the prototype. "But look at these power consumption readings. It's using less energy than our previous designs, not more." Marcus nodded, his expression troubled. "That's not all? The dimensional distortions we're detecting aren't fading like they should. They're growing stronger, and they're spreading outward from the test site in patterns I've never seen before." Meanwhile, thousands of light years away on the gleaming capital world of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Krell of the Veilthran Empire stood before a massive holographic display in the Galactic Council's monitoring center. His tall, pale form moved with the fluid grace of his species as he studied the data streaming in from deep space sensors positioned throughout the galaxy. The Veilthrans had been among the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel, and their understanding of dimensional physics was considered among the most advanced in known space. "The readings are confirmed, Ambassador," reported Lieutenant Torres, a young human officer assigned to the monitoring station as part of the cultural exchange program. "Multiple sensor arrays detected massive gravitational anomalies in human space approximately 47 minutes ago. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases." Krell's crystalline eyes narrowed as he processed the information. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for less than a century, and their technological development had been carefully monitored to prevent them from stumbling into discoveries that could threaten galactic stability. Their previous FTL attempts had been crude but harmless, relying on conventional warp drive technology that posed no significant risk to the fabric of spacetime itself. "Summon Dr. Thane Korvac immediately," Krell commanded, his melodic voice carrying undertones of urgency that made the station's personnel move with increased efficiency. "If the humans have achieved what these readings suggest, we may be facing a crisis that threatens every civilization in the galaxy." Dr. Korvac arrived within minutes, his four arms moving in complex patterns as he analyzed the data streams. The Zirithi scientist was considered one of the foremost experts on dimensional physics in the galaxy, his species having nearly destroyed themselves centuries earlier through reckless experimentation with space-time manipulation. His segmented carapace gleamed under the station's lights as he worked, his compound eyes processing information at speeds that impressed even his alien colleagues. "This is catastrophic," he said finally, his translated voice carrying none of the calm detachment usually associated with scientific analysis. "The humans have created what appears to be a permanent dimensional fracture. The energy readings suggest they've accessed layers of reality that should be impossible to reach with their current technology level." Back on Kepler Station, Elena and Marcus continued their analysis, unaware that their breakthrough was causing panic in the highest levels of galactic government. The prototype drive continued to hum with contained power, its exotic materials glowing with an inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the station's heartbeat. "We need to run another test," Elena said, her excitement overriding Marcus's growing concerns. "If we can replicate these results, we'll have achieved instantaneous travel across any distance. Do you understand what this means? We could reach the Andromeda Galaxy in the blink of an eye." Marcus hesitated, his engineering instincts warning him that they were moving too fast. "Elena, look at these secondary readings. The dimensional distortions aren't random. They're forming patterns, almost like they're responding to some kind of intelligence. And the energy signatures are getting stronger, not weaker." She waved away his concerns, already preparing the prototype for another test. "All revolutionary discoveries come with unexpected side effects. We'll figure out the anomalies later. Right now, we need to focus on the implications of what we've achieved." The second test began with the same careful precision as the first, but the results were far more dramatic. The prototype drive didn't just tear a hole in space-time. It created a cascading series of dimensional fractures that spread outward from the station like cracks in glass. For a brief moment, the laboratory seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its walls becoming transparent to reveal glimpses of alien geometries and impossible colors. Elena stared in wonder at the readings, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The energy output had increased by several orders of magnitude, and the dimensional distortions were creating feedback loops that amplified the effect far beyond their wildest expectations. She had achieved the impossible, but in doing so, she had also opened doorways to places that had been sealed away for good reason. Marcus watched in growing horror as the dimensional scanner displayed readings that made no sense according to conventional physics. The fractures in space-time were not closing as they should have, and something was stirring in the void between dimensions, something ancient and malevolent that had been waiting for exactly this kind of breach to occur. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the humming of the prototype drive, "I think we need to shut this down right now." But Elena was lost in her scientific triumph, her eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of energy that represented humanity's leap into a new era of space travel. She didn't notice the dimensional scanner's warnings, didn't see the way the fractures in reality were widening with each passing moment, and didn't realize that her breakthrough had awakened something that had been sleeping in the darkness between stars for millions of years. The prototype drive continued to hum with increasing power, its exotic materials glowing brighter as the dimensional fractures spread outward into the void, carrying with them the promise of humanity's greatest achievement and the seeds of the galaxy's potential destruction. High Chancellor Vex stood at the center of the Galactic Council chambers, his ancient form radiating the authority that came from leading the galaxy's most powerful alliance for over 2 centuries. The massive circular chamber buzzed with urgent conversations as representatives from dozens of species gathered for an emergency session that had been called with less than an hour's notice. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber showed real-time data from across the galaxy, and the readings were uniformly alarming. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," announced Dr. Thane Korvac as he materialized in the chamber center through a holographic projector, His forearms moved in complex patterns as he manipulated the data displays, showing the assembled representatives the cascade of dimensional distortions that had begun spreading outward from human space. The fractures created by the human FTL test are interfering with hyperspace lanes throughout the galaxy. Captain Narasalis of the Alterian fleet stood to address the council, her blue-scaled features tight with concern. The Alterians had been among the first species to master stable FTL travel, and their hyperspace routes were considered the most reliable in the galaxy. 3 of my ships were pulled into dimensional vortexes while traveling through the Centauri corridor, she reported. The crews reported seeing impossible geometries and hearing sounds that shouldn't exist in vacuum before they managed to escape back to normal space. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs as other representatives began sharing similar reports. The Corvani delegate spoke of cargo ships disappearing entirely while attempting to use traditional warp drives, while the Zelthran ambassador described hyperspace lanes that had become completely impassable due to what their sensors described as reality storms. High Chancellor Vex raised his hand for silence, his crystalline skin shimmering under the chamber's lights. Dr. Korvac explained to the council exactly what the humans have done and why it threatens us all. The Zirathi scientist's compound eyes focused on the assembled representatives as he began his explanation. The humans have discovered a method of faster-than-light travel that doesn't simply bend space-time as our conventional drives do. Instead, they are tearing holes in the fabric of reality itself, creating permanent dimensional fractures that allow instantaneous travel across vast distances. However, these fractures are not isolated events. They are creating a cascade effect that is destabilizing the dimensional foundations upon which all FTL travel depends. A holographic display materialized showing the expanding network of dimensional distortions, spreading outward from human space like a virus. The visualization showed how each fracture was creating smaller secondary fractures, which in turn were generating their own cascading effects. The pattern was clearly accelerating, and the mathematical projections showed that within weeks, the entire galaxy's hyperspace network could collapse. The implications are catastrophic, Dr. Korvac continued. If this cascade continues unchecked, it will not only destroy all existing FTL travel, but could potentially unravel the fabric of space-time itself. We are facing the possibility of a reality collapse that could affect entire star systems. The chamber fell silent as the full scope of the threat became clear. Without FTL travel, the galactic civilization that had taken millennia to build would collapse within decades. Trade routes would be severed, colonies would be stranded, and the carefully maintained balance of power that kept the galaxy stable would crumble. "We must send an immediate warning to Earth," declared Ambassador Krell, his voice carrying the weight of urgent necessity. "The humans must be made to understand the consequences of their actions and shut down their research immediately." "Hi." Chancellor Vex nodded grimly. "Prepare an emergency transmission to the human government. Make it clear that this is not a request but a demand backed by the full authority of the Galactic Council. They must cease all FTL experiments immediately or face the united response of every civilized species in the galaxy." The transmission was prepared with unprecedented speed, its contents reviewed and approved by the full council in less than an hour. The message was clear and unambiguous. Humanity had approximately 12 hours to shut down their FTL, research completely, or face military intervention from the combined fleets of the Galactic Council. However, the transmission never reached Earth's civilian government. Instead, it was intercepted by Admiral Ross Carter, the head of human military intelligence, whose monitoring stations had been tracking increased alien communication traffic for the past several hours. The grizzled veteran had spent decades preparing for the possibility that humanity's rapid technological advancement might eventually bring them into conflict with the galaxy's established powers. "Get me General Patricia Blake immediately," Admiral Carter commanded as he reviewed the translated message. "And prepare the war room for an emergency briefing. It looks like our alien friends have finally decided to show their true colors." Within minutes, The underground command center beneath New Geneva was bustling with activity as military leaders and scientific advisors gathered to assess the situation. General Blake arrived looking tired but alert, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun that spoke to her no-nonsense approach to command. "What's the situation, Admiral?" she asked as she took her seat at the head of the briefing table. Admiral Carter activated the holographic display, showing the intercepted transmission alongside data from humanity's own monitoring stations. "The aliens are demanding that we shut down our FTL research immediately. They claim it's causing some kind of dimensional instability that threatens the entire galaxy. They're giving us 12 hours to comply or face military action." General Blake studied the data carefully, her experienced eyes picking up details that others might miss. "Have we verified these claims about dimensional instability?" "That's the problem," admitted Dr. Richards, the project's military liaison. "We've been detecting unusual readings from the test sites, but we assumed they were normal side effects of breakthrough technology. If the aliens are correct, we may have stumbled into something far more dangerous than we realized." The general's expression hardened as she processed the implications. "Or this could be a convenient excuse to shut down the one technology that might finally level the playing field between humanity and the established galactic powers. They've been content to let us remain junior partners in their civilization. But a truly revolutionary FTL drive would change that dynamic completely." Meanwhile, back on Kepler Station, Dr. Elena Vasquez was reviewing the data from their latest tests when Marcus Webb burst into the laboratory, his face pale with worry. "Elena, we're receiving priority transmissions from Earth Command. They want us to shut down the project immediately." She looked up from her work, irritation flashing across her features. "Shut it down? We're on the verge of the greatest breakthrough in human history. The dimensional readings are showing patterns that suggest we've accessed layers of reality that no one has ever explored before." Marcus activated the communication system, and General Blake's image appeared in the laboratory. "Dr. Vasquez, you need to listen to me very carefully. The Galactic Council has sent us an ultimatum. They claim your FTL experiments are causing dimensional instabilities that threaten the entire galaxy. They're demanding that we shut down the project immediately." Elena's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. "General, with respect, the aliens have never shared their advanced technology with us. They've kept us dependent on their systems and their knowledge. Now that we've achieved something that surpasses their capabilities, they want us to abandon it." "Doctor, I understand your frustration," General Blake replied. "But we need to consider the possibility that they're telling the truth. If your experiments are actually causing the problems they describe, we could be facing a catastrophe that affects every living being in the galaxy." Marcus stepped forward, his engineering training making him naturally cautious about untested technology. "Elena, look at these readings again. The dimensional distortions aren't random, and they're not fading. They're growing stronger and spreading outward in patterns that suggest some kind of intelligence is responding to them." Elena studied the data again, her scientific mind warring with her desire to complete the work that had consumed years of her life. The readings were indeed unusual, but they could just as easily represent unknown aspects of dimensional physics rather than actual dangers. "General, I need more time to analyze these results. The implications of what we've discovered could revolutionize not just travel, but our entire understanding of reality itself." General Blake's expression remained stern. "Doctor, you have 6 hours to complete your analysis and make a recommendation. After that, I'll need to make a decision about whether to comply with the alien ultimatum or prepare for the consequences of refusing." As the transmission ended, Elena turned back to her work with renewed urgency. She had 6 hours to prove that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't also its greatest mistake. But deep in her heart, she was beginning to suspect that Marcus's concerns might be justified. The dimensional readings were showing patterns that defied conventional physics, and something in the void between dimensions was stirring in response to their experiments. The prototype drive continued to hum with barely contained power, its exotic materials glowing brighter as the dimensional fractures it had created spread outward into the darkness between stars, carrying with them the seeds of either humanity's ascension or the galaxy's destruction. Administrator Jacques Keller stood on the observation deck of mining station Cora 7, watching the red dwarf star cast its dim light across the asteroid field that had been his home for the past 5 years. The station processed rare minerals essential for advanced technology, its automated systems working around the clock to extract wealth from the rocky debris of a long-dead solar system. The work was dangerous and isolating, but it paid well, enough to support his family back on the colony world of New Geneva. The first sign that something was wrong came when the station's proximity alarms began sounding, their shrill warnings echoing through the corridors without any apparent cause. Jacques hurried to the control room, where his small crew was already gathered around the sensor displays, their faces etched with confusion and growing fear. "Sir, the sensors are detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of the outer rim," reported engineer Lisa Torres, her voice tight with concern. "But the readings don't match any known ship configurations or natural phenomena." Jacques studied the displays, his experienced eyes trying to make sense of the data. The energy signatures were unlike anything in their databases, appearing to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that their instruments couldn't properly measure. The readings fluctuated wildly, sometimes showing solid objects the size of small moons, other times indicating nothing but empty space. "Could it be some kind of experimental alien technology?" asked Dr. Mike Chun, the station's resident physicist. "The energy patterns are consistent with dimensional manipulation, but the scale is far beyond anything we've encountered before. Jacques could respond. The station's lights began to flicker, and the artificial gravity systems experienced momentary failures that sent equipment floating through the air. The hull itself seemed to vibrate with frequencies that made the crew's teeth ache, and the air itself began to shimmer with an oily iridescence that hurt to look at directly. "Sir, we're detecting hull breaches in sections 7 through 12, Torres reported, her voice rising with panic. "But the atmosphere isn't venting. It's like the holes are sealed with something that our sensors can't detect." Jacques activated the emergency communication system, preparing to send a distress signal to the nearest inhabited system, but the transmission was cut short by a sound that no human throat should have been able to produce. It was a harmonious wailing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a melody that spoke of vast intelligences and ancient hungers that had waited in the darkness between stars for eons. The crew watched in horror as the walls of the station began to ripple like water, their solid metal surfaces becoming translucent and revealing glimpses of impossible geometries that existed in spaces their minds couldn't comprehend. Through these windows into other dimensions, they could see shapes moving with purpose and intelligence, beings that seemed to be composed of living shadow and crystallized thought. "They're coming through the hull," whispered Dr. Chun, his scientific curiosity warring with primal terror as he watched the entities phase through solid matter as if it were nothing more than mist. "They exist partially outside normal spacetime, which is why our sensors can't get consistent readings." The first entity to fully manifest in the station's main corridor was a creature that defied description, its form shifting constantly between states of matter and energy. It stood roughly 3 meters tall, its surface covered in what appeared to be scales that reflected light from dimensions human eyes couldn't see. When it moved, space itself seemed to bend around it, creating distortions that made the crew's vision blur and their inner ears scream with vertigo. Jacques tried to reach for the emergency weapon locker, but his hand passed through the controls as if they existed in a different layer of reality. The entities weren't just phasing through solid matter. They were selectively interacting with the physical world, affecting some objects while ignoring others according to principles that made no scientific sense. "The dimensional energy," Dr. Chun said suddenly, his voice filled with horrified understanding. "They're feeding on the fractures in space-time. Each breach makes them stronger, more able to interact with our reality." The entity turned its attention to the crew, and they could feel its alien intelligence examining them with the detached interest of a scientist studying insects. It made no aggressive moves, but its very presence was draining the station's power. Systems, causing the lights to dim and the life support systems to falter. Meanwhile, light years away, Council Fleet Commander Zara Thorne stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Vigilance, coordinating the largest evacuation operation in galactic history. The reports were coming in from across the galaxy, each one more disturbing than the last. The entities that had emerged from the dimensional fractures were spreading rapidly, consuming entire star systems and leaving behind regions of space where reality itself had become unstable. Commander, we're receiving evacuation requests from the Kepler, Vega, and Proxima sectors, reported Lieutenant Vale Morrison, her forearms working frantically at the tactical display. The entities are moving faster than our projections indicated. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within days. Zara studied the tactical display, her experienced military mind trying to find patterns in the chaos. The entities seemed to be following the same dimensional pathways that the human FTL drive had created, using the fractures in space-time as highways that allowed them to move instantaneously across vast distances. Each time they manifested in a new location, they created additional fractures, spreading the dimensional instability like a virus throughout the galaxy. "What's the status of our weapons tests?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Conventional. Weapons are completely ineffective," Vale replied grimly. "Energy weapons pass through them without effect, and projectile weapons simply phase through their bodies. The only thing that seems to slow them down is dimensional manipulation technology, but using it appears to make them stronger in the long run." The fleet's scientists had been working around the clock to understand the entities and develop countermeasures, but their efforts were hampered by the creature's ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Traditional physics simply didn't apply to beings that could selectively interact with reality, choosing which physical laws to obey and which to ignore. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth," announced Communications Officer Ryan Davies. "It's from Dr. Elena Vasquez, the scientist responsible for the FTL experiments." Zara nodded for the transmission to be put through, and Elena's image appeared on the bridge's main display. The human scientist looked exhausted, her hair disheveled and her eyes red from hours of continuous work. Behind her, the laboratory on Kepler station showed signs of the dimensional distortions that had been spreading throughout the facility. "Commander Thorne, I believe I understand what's happening," Elena said without preamble. "The entities aren't invaders from another dimension. They're prisoners, and my FTL experiments have damaged their prison." The bridge fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. If the entities were prisoners, then something had originally confined them to the spaces between dimensions, and that something had possessed technology far beyond anything currently available to the galaxy's civilizations. "The dimensional fractures I created aren't just random tears in space-time," Elena continued. "They're accessing a prison dimension that was created by an advanced civilization, possibly millions of years ago. My equations were incomplete because I didn't understand that the layers of reality I was manipulating were actually containment fields." Marcus Webb appeared beside Elena in the transmission, his face pale with the weight of their discovery. "We've been analyzing the dimensional patterns, and they're not natural. Someone or something designed these barriers specifically to contain the entities we've released. The question is whether we can repair the damage before they escape completely." Zara felt a chill run down her spine as she processed the information. The galaxy was facing not just an invasion, but a prison break that threatened to unleash horrors that an ancient civilization had deemed too dangerous to exist in normal space. "Dr. Vasquez, do you have any idea how to repair the dimensional barriers?" Elena's expression was grim. "The mathematics are incredibly complex, but I believe it's possible. However, it would require coordinated dimensional pulses from across the galaxy using the same FTL technology that caused the problem in the first place. The power requirements would be enormous, and the margin for error would be essentially zero." Before anyone could respond, the bridge's sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching the fleet's position. The entities had found them, drawn by the dimensional distortions created by the ship's FTL drives. Through the viewports, the crew could see space itself beginning to ripple and distort as the creatures prepared to manifest in normal reality. "All ships, prepare for emergency jump," Zara commanded, but she knew it was already too late. The entities were using the fleet's own FTL drives against them, turning the technology that had made galactic civilization possible into a weapon that could destroy everything they had built. As the creatures began to phase through the hull of the Eternal Vigilance, Zara realized that the galaxy was facing a threat that conventional military tactics couldn't defeat. The solution would require not just courage and sacrifice, but a level of cooperation between species that had never been achieved before. The entities continued their relentless advance, feeding on the dimensional energy that permeated the galaxy and growing stronger with each passing moment. While somewhere in the darkness between stars, something far worse was stirring in response. To their calls, Dr. Finn Reeves floated in the zero-gravity environment of the ancient derelict station, his exploration suit's lights casting eerie shadows across walls that had not seen visitors for millions of years. The structure drifted silently in the galactic core, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest ships in the current galactic fleet. The xenorchaeologist had spent his entire career studying the remnants of dead civilizations, but nothing had prepared him for the scale and sophistication of what his team had discovered. "The architecture is unlike anything in our databases," reported Dr. Sarah Kim, her voice crackling through the CUM system as she examined hieroglyphic-like symbols carved into the station's hull. "The materials appear to be composed of crystallized space-time itself, which should be theoretically impossible according to our understanding of physics." Finn guided himself through the station's corridors using his suit's maneuvering thrusters, marveling at the way the walls seemed to pulse with a faint inner light that responded to his presence. The builders of this place had clearly mastered technologies that made even the most advanced current civilizations look primitive by comparison. Every surface was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. The breakthrough came when Dr. Kim discovered what appeared to be a central control room, its walls lined with crystalline matrices that began to glow brighter as the team approached. The moment Finn touched one of the control surfaces, the entire chamber came alive with holographic displays showing star charts, mathematical equations, and images of creatures that made his blood run cold. "My God," whispered Dr. Kim as she studied the displays. "These are the entities that are attacking the galaxy. This civilization knew about them, probably fought them." The holographic displays showed the same shadow creatures that were currently terrorizing inhabited worlds, but here they were depicted as prisoners being sealed away in dimensional cells. The mathematics surrounding the containment procedures were far beyond anything in current galactic knowledge, involving manipulations of space-time that required precisely coordinated actions across multiple realities. "There's something else," announced Dr. Roberts, the teen's linguist, as he worked to decipher the alien writing. The symbols seemed to be describing a warning, something about a greater threat that exists beyond the imprisoned entities. The station's systems responded to their presence by activating what appeared to be a final message left by the station's builders. A holographic figure materialized in the center of the chamber, its form shifting between different species as if it represented the collective will of an entire civilization. When it spoke, the words were somehow translated directly into the minds of the listening humans. "If you are receiving this message, then the prison has been breached, and the void entities have begun to escape," the figure said, its voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom and terrible knowledge. "We are the eternal architects, and we ruled this galaxy before your species were even conceived. The entities you face are not the true threat. They are merely the heralds of something far worse." The holographic display shifted to show images of space itself being consumed by a darkness that seemed to devour light and matter with equal hunger. The visualization showed entire star systems being pulled into this void, their matter and energy feeding something that existed beyond the boundaries of normal reality. The void entities serve a master known as the devourer of realities, the message continued. It exists in the spaces between universes, feeding on the collapse of dimensional barriers and the destruction of organized matter. We imprisoned the entities not to punish them, but to prevent them from calling their master into our reality. Dr. Reeves felt his heart sink as he realized the implications. The dimensional fractures created by the human FTL drive weren't just releasing dangerous prisoners. They were creating a beacon that would eventually attract the attention of something that could destroy not just the galaxy, but the entire universe. The prison was designed to contain the entities indefinitely. The architect continued, but it required constant maintenance and monitoring. When our civilization fell to a plague that turned thought itself into poison, we could only hope that the barriers would hold until another species evolved capable of maintaining them. The message provided detailed schematics for the prisons. Construction, showing how the eternal architects had used synchronized, dimensional pulses from across the galaxy to create a network of containment fields that existed in the spaces between normal dimensions. The technology was incredibly advanced, but the basic principles were similar to those used in current FTL drives. Meanwhile, Consul General Riker Brahms stood in the command center of the orbital station above Nexus Prime, coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history. The reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of systematic destruction as the void entities consumed world after world, their appetite for dimensional energy growing stronger with each victory. The evacuation of the Altair system is complete, reported Admiral Susan Clark, her image appearing on the main display, but the entities are adapting to our tactics. They're learning to predict our movement patterns and intercept our evacuation fleets. Riker studied the tactical displays, his experienced military mind trying to find weakness in an enemy that seemed to exist partially outside the normal rules of warfare. The entities could phase through solid matter at will, making traditional fortifications useless. They fed on the dimensional energy that powered all FTL technology, making it dangerous to use the very systems that held galactic civilization together. "What's the status of the joint human-alien research project?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be encouraging. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Korvac are making progress, but they estimate it will take weeks to develop a working solution, Clark replied. The entities are consuming star systems faster than we can evacuate them. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within days. The breakthrough came when Pilot Commander Lisa Shaw returned from a reconnaissance mission with data that changed everything. Her small fighter had been equipped with experimental dimensional sensors that could track the entity's movements through multiple layers of reality, and what she had discovered was terrifying. The entities aren't just escaping randomly, she reported to the assembled command staff. They're following a specific pattern, moving toward locations where the dimensional barriers are weakest. They're trying to create a massive breach in the galactic core that will allow something much larger to enter our reality. The sensor data showed the entities converging on a point in space that corresponded to the location of the ancient architect station. The mathematical models indicated that when enough of them gathered in one place, their combined dimensional distortions would create a permanent rift large enough for their master to enter the universe. "How long do we have?" asked General Brahms, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "Based on their current movement patterns, approximately 18 hours, Shaw replied. "After that, the dimensional barriers will collapse completely, and we'll be facing something that the eternal architects themselves couldn't defeat." The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy's combined military forces were already stretched to their limits trying to contain the void entities, and now they faced the prospect of fighting something that had destroyed a civilization far more advanced than their own. "There's one possibility." Dr. Vasquez's voice came through the communication system as her image appeared on the main display. The architect message included detailed schematics for rebuilding the prison. "If we can coordinate dimensional pulses From every FTL drive in the galaxy, we might be able to recreate the containment fields. Dr. Korvac materialized beside her, his four arms moving in agitated patterns. The power requirements would be enormous. We would need to synchronize every ship, every station, every experimental drive across hundreds of star systems. The margin for error would be essentially zero. And the cost? Asked General Brahms, though he already knew the answer. The dimensional cascade would destroy most of the FTL drives in the galaxy, Elena admitted. Even if we succeed in rebuilding, the prison, galactic civilization would be set back centuries. Most colonies would be cut off from their homeworlds, and the carefully maintained trade networks that support billions of lives would collapse. The assembled military leaders exchanged grim looks as they realized that success would come at a price that might be as devastating as failure. The galaxy faced a choice between certain destruction and a collapse that would condemn countless worlds to isolation and possible extinction. The decision isn't ours to make, General Brahms said finally. This affects every species in the galaxy. We need to present the options to the full Galactic Council and let them decide whether the cost is worth paying. As the meeting broke up, the participants couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching the end of the galaxy as they knew it. The void entities continued their relentless advance toward the galactic core, their masters stirring in the darkness between universes, while the combined forces of civilization prepared for a battle that would determine the fate of reality itself. The ancient warning of the eternal architects echoed through the minds of those who had heard it, a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations could fall to threats that existed beyond the boundaries of normal understanding, and that sometimes the price of survival was almost as terrible as the consequences of defeat. Asterisk, 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 the combined fleets of the galaxy hung in space near the galactic core, their ships arranged in a formation that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. Human destroyers flew alongside Velthran cruisers, Alterian battleships coordinated with Zirithi science vessels, and species that had been enemies for centuries worked together in the face of a threat that made their previous conflicts seem insignificant. General Patricia Blake stood on the bridge of the command ship Unity, watching the tactical displays that showed the approaching void entities converging on their position. The creatures moved through space like living nightmares, their forms shifting between dimensions as they fed on the dimensional energy that permeated the galaxy. Behind them, space itself seemed to ripple and tear as something far larger began to force its way through the barriers between realities. "The Devourer is beginning to manifest," announced Dr. Thane Korvac, his four arms working frantically at the sensor controls. "The dimensional readings are off the charts. When it fully enters our reality, it will begin consuming matter and energy at an exponential rate." High Chancellor Vex materialized beside the general through a holographic projector, his ancient form radiating the authority of someone who had led the galaxy through countless crises. "General Blake, the Council has reached a unanimous decision. The dimensional cascade must proceed as planned, regardless of the cost to galactic civilization." Patricia nodded grimly, understanding the weight of the decision. Every inhabited world in the galaxy would be affected by what they were about to do. The carefully maintained trade networks that supported billions of lives would collapse. Colonies would be cut off from their homeworlds, and the technological infrastructure that had taken millennia to build would be destroyed in a matter of hours. "Dr. Vasquez, what's the status of the cascade preparation?" she asked, turning to the human scientist who had become the unlikely coordinator of the galaxy's last hope. Elena appeared on the main display, her image transmitted from the control room of Kepler Station where she had spent the last 3 days, modifying the prototype FTL drive for its final purpose. "All systems are synchronized, General. We have confirmation from 3,742 FTL drives across the galaxy. When we initiate the cascade, the dimensional pulses will propagate through hyperspace at faster than light speeds, creating a galaxy-wide containment field." Marcus Webb stepped into view beside Elena, his face showing the strain of the continuous work they had been doing. The power requirements are at the absolute limit of what our systems can handle. We estimate that 70% of the participating drives will be destroyed in the cascade, and the remaining 30% will be permanently damaged. The magnitude of the sacrifice was staggering. The galaxy's most advanced technology would be reduced to scrap metal, and the surviving civilizations would be forced to rebuild from the ground up. Entire star systems would be cut off from the rest of the galaxy, forced to survive on their own resources, while new forms of FTL travel were developed. "There's something else," Elena continued, her voice heavy with the weight of additional bad news. "The cascade will need to be initiated manually from the original prototype drive. Someone will need to remain at the station to make real-time adjustments to the dimensional frequencies. The radiation exposure will be lethal within minutes." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. The plan required not just the destruction of galactic civilization's most advanced technology, but the sacrifice of whoever remained to guide the cascade. It was a price that someone would have to pay to ensure the galaxy's survival. "I'll do it," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the comm system. "I helped create this mess, and I understand the drive systems better than anyone except Elena. She's needed to coordinate the galaxy-wide synchronization." Elena's face showed the pain of losing her closest friend and colleague, but she also understood the necessity. "Marcus, the radiation will kill you within 5 minutes of initiating the cascade. There's no coming back from this." "I know," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "But if we don't do this, the Devourer will consume everything. Anyway, at least this way, something survives." Meanwhile, the void entities had begun their final assault on the combined fleet. The creatures phased through the hulls of ships like living shadows, their touch draining power from the vessel's systems and leaving behind regions of space where reality itself had become unstable. The fleet's weapons were useless against enemies that existed partially outside normal spacetime. "All ships, maintain formation," commanded Admiral Torres from the bridge of the Alterian flagship. "We don't need to defeat them, just delay them long enough for the cascade to work." The battle was unlike anything in galactic history. Ships exploded not from weapon fire, but from dimensional distortions that tore them apart at the molecular level. Crews fought against enemies that could become intangible at will, their conventional weapons passing harmlessly through targets that reformed moments later. Commander Lisa Shaw piloted her fighter through the chaos, her experimental dimensional sensors tracking the entity's movements through multiple layers of reality. "The creatures are converging on the galactic core," she reported. "They're trying to create a dimensional breach large enough for their master to enter completely." The space around the ancient architect station began to ripple and distort as the devourer of realities forced more of its essence through the barriers between universes. The creature was so vast that only a fraction of its form could exist in normal space at any given time, but even that fraction was larger than most star systems. "The dimensional barriers are failing," Dr. Korvac reported, his voice tight with scientific fascination and primal terror. "The Devourer's presence is causing a cascade failure in the fabric of space-time itself. If it fully manifests, it will begin consuming matter and energy at an exponential rate." General Blake watched the tactical displays as the situation deteriorated rapidly. The combined fleet was taking heavy casualties, and the void entities were systematically destroying the defensive positions that had been so carefully prepared. In less than an hour, the galaxy would face an enemy that could devour entire star systems. "Dr. Vasquez, initiate the cascade now," she commanded. Knowing that they had run out of time for careful preparation, Elena's hands moved across the control surfaces of the prototype drive, her fingers dancing over interfaces that represented years of theoretical work and months of desperate modification, beginning dimensional synchronization across all participating drives. "Marcus, are you ready?" Marcus stood in the radiation-shielded chamber that housed the prototype's core systems, his hands resting on the manual controls that would guide the cascade. "I'm ready, Elena. Just tell me when." The synchronized activation began with a low humming that seemed to come from the very fabric of space itself. Across the galaxy, 3,742 FTL drives began to resonate in perfect harmony, their combined output creating dimensional waves that propagated through hyperspace at impossible speeds. Cascade initiation in 10 seconds, Elena announced, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Marcus, it's been an honor working with you. The honor was mine, he replied, his hands moving to the final activation controls. Tell my family I died doing something that mattered. The cascade began with a pulse of energy that seemed to originate from every point in space simultaneously. The dimensional waves spread outward from each participating drive, creating interference, patterns that reinforced each other in precisely calculated ways. Where the waves intersected, reality itself began to crystallize into new configurations that existed in the spaces between normal dimensions. Marcus watched the radiation levels climb rapidly as the prototype drive channeled energies that no human technology was designed to handle. His body began to fail within minutes, but his hands remained steady on the controls, making the minute adjustments that kept the cascade synchronized across the galaxy. The containment field is forming, Elena reported, her voice filled with wonder and grief. The dimensional barriers are solidifying around the void entities. The effect was visible even to the naked eye as space itself began to shimmer with an oily iridescence that spoke of barriers being reformed in dimensions beyond normal perception. The void entities found themselves trapped once again, their forms becoming less solid as the containment field cut them off from the dimensional energy they needed to maintain their presence in normal space. The devourer of realities fought against the closing barriers, its massive form thrashing against the crystallizing space-time that was forcing it back into its prison. For a moment, it seemed that the creature might break through completely, but the cascade was too strong, the synchronization too perfect. The barriers are holding, Dr. Korvac reported, his voice filled with scientific amazement. The containment field is stable and self-reinforcing. The entities are being pulled back into their prison dimension. The cost was immediate and catastrophic. Across the galaxy, FTL drives overloaded and exploded, their exotic matter cores releasing energies that vaporized entire ship sections. The carefully maintained hyperspace lanes that connected the galaxy's civilizations collapsed, leaving behind regions of space where faster-than-light travel was impossible. Marcus, respond please, Elena called out, but there was no answer from the prototype station. The dimensional cascade had succeeded, but the man who had guided it through its critical moments was gone, his sacrifice ensuring that the galaxy would survive to rebuild. The aftermath was as devastating as predicted. Entire star systems found themselves cut off from the rest of galactic civilization, forced to survive on their own resources, while new forms of FTL travel were developed. The great cities of the core worlds struggled to maintain their populations, without the constant flow of resources from the outer colonies, but life continued. The Galactic Council was reformed as the Galactic Alliance, with humanity playing a central role in the new organization. The shared sacrifice had created bonds between species that had never existed before, and the knowledge that they had faced extinction together gave them strength to face the challenges of rebuilding. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now elderly and honored, throughout the galaxy worked with the next generation of scientists to develop safer forms of FTL travel. The prototype drive that had caused the crisis became a monument to both human ingenuity and the dangers of uncontrolled scientific advancement. The dimensional barriers held strong, their crystalline structure visible to those who knew how to look. The void entities remained trapped in their prison, and the devourer of realities was forced back into the spaces between universes. The galaxy was safe, but the scars of the crisis would remain for generations. Years later, as Elena stood in her laboratory looking out at the stars, she received a signal from deep space that made her blood run cold. It was similar to the transmissions from the Eternal Architects, but this one came from beyond the galaxy itself, from civilizations that faced their own struggles against the forces that lurked in the darkness between realities. The message was simple but terrifying. The war against the Devourer and its servants was far from over, and humanity's sacrifice had been just the first battle in a cosmic conflict that spanned multiple universes. The galaxy was safe for now, but somewhere in the infinite darkness of space, other worlds were fighting for their survival against enemies that existed beyond the boundaries of normal understanding.